Hello and welcome to another episode of Spec Steppin, where we are stepping through the web API spec. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the Contact Picker API. Now, note this is an experimental API, so I would not suggest using it in production. However, it's a good idea to kind of keep tabs on these and keep an eye on these because you never know when they may be released and no longer marked as experimental, and you can use them in your application. So let's go ahead and dive in and talk about what the Contact Picker API is, and then I'll show you a little demo I have for it. So basically, the Contact Picker API allows your web app to have access to the contacts on the device. So I see this as very applicable to a mobile application that you've built using web technologies such as JavaScript. So you'd have in your application the ability to click a button, access the contacts on the device to maybe have a messaging. You want to send a message, like maybe you're building a messaging app or you're building it so that they can do VoIP or whatever the case may be. So basically, we can access the contacts that are on the device. Now, because this is experimental, you're not able to do this everywhere. If I jump down to browser compatibility, you'll see from an experimental standpoint, this is pretty experimental as far as being able to use it. So you can't use it almost anywhere right now. So you can use it in a web view in Android. So if you're building an application that uses a web view, you can use the Opera in Android, you can use Chrome in Android, but you can't use it on Safari, so you can't use it on iOS, and you can't use it on any of the typical desktop browsers. You can't even use it on the web view in iOS. So it's pretty limited in what you can do right now. However, as it evolves, I imagine it will probably be more usage and when it's no longer experimental, as it's a pretty cool feature. Now, let me just show you the demo at least, or show you the screen and stuff in the browser just so it's easier to see. But I have an emulator. I'm going to show it to you. So here, I just built a quick screen, nothing fancy here, that I have a button and I'm going to show the information right in here. Now, you'll see if I click pick contact, because I am in my Brave, which is a Chromium-based browser, and it's not, as you can go back over here, since it's Chromium-based, it's not going to work here. So if I click it, say it's not supported on this browser and device, you'll see where I am having that output based on my code. So you'll see that there. So by clicking that, it's going to show up here in the emulator. So let me jump over to the emulator here. Now, in order for this to work, you have to have, SSL or some sort of security certificate, HTTPS. I'm in my local host, and so I'm not as concerned. Yeah, you can have I use a dev certificate a lot when I'm developing locally. I didn't want to jump through those hoops for this, and it wasn't necessary for this. And note, I am using an emulator. This is because it's only available on Android. I'm actually using an AVD, that virtual device from the Android Studio, which is a pretty good program. If you're developing natively, that's the probably IDE that you're going to use for developing in Java for Android. But I use it a lot because I do hybrid apps a lot. So what I do is I use it a lot for the AVD and to test an APK and things like that for all my devices, so that I don't have to own a million and one devices. So here, just as a little tip, if you notice up here, I have localhost 127.0.0.1. But if I go here, notice it's 10.0.2.2. That is just a little trick that you can do on an Android device, emulator, I should say, not a regular device, an emulator where 10.0.2.2, that IP in an emulator maps to 127.0.0.1. Because if I were to take this URL and plug it in here, that wouldn't work. It doesn't really, because it's an emulator and it's emulating a device, it's not going to see my local host, because local host here would be local to my device. So what Android does is they map this 10.0.2.2 to the 127.0.0.1 that's on your desktop so that you can do this type of stuff in testing and development. Now, if you're going to test this locally, and make sure that when you do this in your emulator, you've added at least a contacts. I've added a contact, so otherwise, when you click pick a contact, it's going to say, "Hey, you don't have any contacts to add." So make sure you do at least that. And when you first, now I've already run through this once when I was building this little demo, so it's not going to show it now, but just so you're aware, the first time you click pick contact, it's going to actually bring up a window asking for permission to access the contacts, just like, like when we're doing geolocation or if you're accessing the mic or the video, it always, the browsers always bring up this permission granting modal type of say or little dialogue so that the end user can give permission to access that. I've already given permission, so we should be good. So I don't have any contacts selected. If I click pick a contact, now it asks me to select contact. It tells me that it's going to be shared with this website. And then I can choose up here what to share. So these are currently in the API, the 5 things you can share: name, address, email, phone, profile, photo. So those are the 5 things that can be shared currently. They may change as it evolves. And here is my contact, Joe Schmo, who works at ABC Company. So I can click that one. It's selected. I can click done and it's now dumped. I'm just dumping a JSON format so you can see how that looks on the screen. So it's just dumping out. I don't have an address for Joe Schmo. I have his email. Icon would be the profile picture. I don't have that for this one. His name and his telephone number. So you can really make some cool things with this. And again, I wouldn't use it in production because it's experimental, but it is a pretty cool API that you could use once it's released. You could play with it and you could have somebody interact with their contacts to send information to somebody else or receive information. It's whatever you can do with contacts, basically. Now, let's jump to the code so you can see kind of how I did this. So HTML is pretty minimal. I just have some H1s, that little paragraph, that button that is going to do its thing. I have an output with a pre-tag there to put stuff on the screen. And then my styles are pretty minimal. So just for font sizes, things like that, nothing special. So here's where the code, and if you see, it's only 36 lines of code. So even with spacing, so it's not a very complex API. So first thing I do is I'm grabbing that button and I'm grabbing the output so I can do stuff with it. And then on the button down here, I'm attaching an event listener of click that when I click the button, this pick contact async function will run. So this is where the magic actually occurs. Now, the first thing I do is I'm checking to see if the contacts, if this API is available, especially since it's experimental, but I would recommend you do that anytime you're using the API because you can't guarantee that the end user is using the recommended environment. And so it's just an if, and then it's saying, hey, it's not supported. Now, this is what you saw in the beginning where when I clicked it on the browser, if I go back, it said not supported. That's where this came from because it's not supported in the desktop browser. Now, all I'm doing is outputting that to the window. I would probably recommend a little more elegant solution fallback to degrade gracefully, but for the sake of this demo, that's okay. So then in my little try catch block here is where I'm actually doing this stuff. So first, I grab the fields to request from the contacts. So that's those 5 fields that show up that have access to. I'm only allowing to pick one contact at a time in this case, just because, well, I only had one contact, but that may be a little, depending on your application, you may want to only allow one contact. That way, in your logic, when they pull the contact over and whatever you're doing with that contact, you're only dealing with one, so you don't have to do any looping type of logic. So totally up to you, but that's how I set this one up. And then here in my contacts, I'm opening the contact picker using navigator contact select. That's the contact picker method. And then I just wait for the user to select the contact. So what it does is it opens up and like you saw it happen. And then it waited for me to select Joe Schmo. And when I selected it, it would only allow me to select one and it would pass through these 5 items. Then I'm just testing to make sure I've gotten one. So if the length is greater than 0, so I have one, then I'm just putting in that output pre-tag, and I'm just taking JSON and stringifying it out to the screen is all I'm doing. Otherwise, it's going to say no contact selected. So, and if I have any error, I just output an error. So it will output like this. So not a real complex API. Again, experimental. So I can't say this enough. Don't use it in production, but keep it kind of back your mind and watch for different updates and things that come out. And this may become an API that gets fully released and has some possibilities to use in your applications. If you have any questions, let me know. And if not, happy stepping.